Why, hi there, it's Uncle Ron, and you're just going to look at me for the next little while. No other pictures today, just me, my microphone, and my camera. And I still need to return the other camera that didn't quite work. All right, so today we're going to talk about, on Uncle Ron on Writing, about my writing process. Now, I'm using a program called Living Writer, and I'll get into that in a bit, but if you just want to use Microsoft Word, go ahead, use Microsoft Word. The one recommendation that if you're going to be doing some fictional stuff with Microsoft Word is that you save each individual chapter or scene as a file together. Create your own folder, not OneDrive. Put them in there. It's going to make editing a heck of a lot easier. You can always cut and paste everything together when you're ready. So you never need anything beyond WordPad or Notepad or Microsoft Word. I use Living Writer. I'll get to why I do that as we go along. So what I do is I tell myself probably 4 or 5 what I call chapters. They could be scenes. I haven't figured out how in the finished product they're going to go. Ahead of where I am. I've written about 18,000 words on a novel, in the last month. About 2 or 3 nights a week, I'll sit and shut off the lights and write what I call a chapter or half a chapter, essentially a long scene. Remember, the first draft of anything, you're pretty much writing for yourself. You are telling yourself the story, and you never know where you're going to go. I mean, even when I have done extensive outlines on fictional stories before, you really don't know what you're going to be doing within your mini scene or mini chapter before you actually write it all out. And so you're telling yourself the story. You go through and say, does this fit where I have in my outline? Or at least that's how I do it. What I have in my outline or corkboard or whatever, adjust accordingly, figure out where you're going to go from there, rinse and repeat. So I shoot for, let's say, depending on the scene, anywhere from 900 to 2,000 words per chapter. Just seems to work for me. I can do about 1,000 words an hour if I really get rolling and all that. So I write it out. If I see a spelling mistake, I will fix it because red squiggly lines are not your friend. But that's the only editing that I do during the draft process of that. Okay, I get my scene, I cut and paste it into my grammar editor, Pro Writing Aid, and then it'll give me a horrible grade. Um, my grammar scores are usually between 40 and 60. It's ugly. I get them all right. I fix for grammar, fix for style, but that does not mean that that scene is done. It just means that it looks kind of pretty. That doesn't mean that it's done. And then I post it back into Living Writer, which you can download. I think there might even be a free version, and done with that. So then after, so that's how I pretty much do what I need to do that. That makes a lot of sense, Ron. So then I run an AI critique on my work, which is why I'm using Living Writer, because that is included. It's expensive. It's $30 a month, but it's unlimited usage of AI. And Pro Writing Aid. And if you want to see these up close, let me know in the comments, and I will be glad to do a video showing off the AI features for both of those particular programs. So I'll run it through the initial AI and Living Writer, and it will tell me what the tone is, what I need to work on when it comes time to revise the scene, which I don't do. You're not really supposed to do it until you're done writing the complete first draft. Then you go through and tear it apart. And then, so the general AI and Living Writer show tells you summary of what you wrote, things that you should be thinking about when you revise, and the tone of the piece. It is somewhat helpful. There's one particular thing we'll talk about in a minute that drives me nuts, but you want, if you're going to ask something for an honest answer, then you better expect an honest answer for what you get. When I'm in the process of doing the grammar editing and Pro Writing Aid, they do what I think, and again, if you want to see this, I'll be happy to show you, what I think is the best AI critique that I've seen so far. The bad news is it's limited to 4,000 words, and you only get one in 24 hours. And I'm not paying $300 extra so I can get that to 3, because I'm not writing that much that fast. But what the Pro Writing Aid grammar or AI critique will do is it breaks things down into, how's the tension? How's the scene set? Where can it be strengthened? How are the transitions? Is the dialogue good? Things that when you see it, you go, okay, that makes logical sense. It will give you some hints in how to make it stronger. And some of those actually agree with what Living Writer will tell you need to work on. And that gives you an idea when you put that scene to bed, what it is you'll need to work on for when you go back to it, okay? The other thing that Living Writer does is you can ask the AI at any point, what am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? And I think feedback, positive feedback, because if you've ever done any fiction writing, you think it's all garbage anyway. You want to know what you're doing right, because when you go through and edit the crap out of it later on, you want to know what someone thinks you've done right. And so that's always good. You can also ask the AI and Living Writer to say, well, what needs to be strengthened? And it is honest about what it thinks needs to be strengthened. Now, I don't know how much the AI thinks is what would pass for a good piece of fiction, what it thinks would be an ideal piece of fiction. Again, it's whatever you think is an ideal piece of fiction. It will tell you if you're wordy. It will tell you if you need to put more details in. So it's not going to sit there and applaud your work. You're using that tool. You're paying for access for that tool to tell you what it thinks. 1 second. I do the grammar edit in AI after every scene just for my own personal thing, because I want to know, what needs to be done, and it's just easier to get some of the basics done right off the bat. You're right. Then you take the half hour to go through and read what it suggests that you do. You don't do it right away. If you get caught, from my point of view, if you do that and just try to get the perfect piece of prose off the bat, you aren't going to get it. So I'll go, and Living Writer, you can set a status. And so first draft done is usually what it is that I will put down, and that's highlighted in blue. If I think something needs a definite hardcore rework, I'll put a red thing there. If there's something I think the AI told me in one particular scene that I was too verbose in my dialogue, which it's not told me in anything else that I've done, that I was too verbose in my dialogue. Cut down some of the purple prose. Okay, so now I know when I finish the first draft of the story, get to the second part of what I'm doing, and then start to go back and repolish the first part, that the stuff that is highlighted in red, either the AI went, think about this again, or just kind of go through, expand your thoughts, see if you can you and the AI you and your beta reader, which is the AI at this point, are on the same page. That's how I do it. I know people who will completely write their first drafts and then won't do any sort of editing until then. And I know of writers who sit there and will do their 1,000 to 1,500 words and just beat it to a pulp until it's right. And if you've done enough experience, maybe you can actually be good enough to really just do a good first draft and a light revision for a second. That's not me. So, one of the things that seems to be quite common in the AI's criticism of my writing is I don't leave enough sensory detail. Okay, that's fine. Now, my personal view is I could sit there and tell you that someone is wearing a flowery dress with lilacs and lilies and, wearing Mary Janes and with ribbons in her hair and all that, or he was dressed smartly in a teal polo shirt and sweatpants, looking rather haggard because he hadn't shaved since Friday. I'm really not sure, how much of that would relate to the story I'm trying to tell. If I tell you it's a crisp, cool New England autumn day, I think most of you in your head are going to have an image of what a crisp, cool New England autumn day is. It could be different for each one of you, but if you're going to be reading, my personal take is, if you're going to be reading a piece of fiction, you want to leave enough there to leave you enough there to guide you to see what it is that you want to see. I don't want to be bogging my readers down with all sorts of long-winded descriptions of what, for instance, popcorn tastes like, which is something that came back in another scene from the AI. You could do better to determine what popcorn tastes like. Unless you've never eaten popcorn before, you know what buttered popcorn tastes like. I do not need to tell you what buttered popcorn tastes like. For me, it just takes away from the story. Whatever it is, advance the plot. Obviously, you need to put some backstory in and some details. It's not completely sparse in that sort of thing. But I want the story to move along and feed you what you need to know, so to speak, as we go along. Again, it is important. I don't need to tell you it's an 8 by 10 room that you're in, but I believe the protagonist's apartment, or his growing up, the living room, the dining room, and the kitchen are pretty much one long room. There's a galley for the kitchen. The bedrooms are across the hall, and the walls are pretty much an off-white. That's pretty much all I should ever need to tell you about that place. It can tell you, what direction it is and what time the sun hits it and all that, but that would only be relevant for the scenes that the sun may or may not be playing in the room. So that's an interesting thing for me, because that's the one thing that has consistently come back from the AI things is you need more sensory stuff. You need to know what you're touching and what people look like and all that. And again, my take is it's probably right, but there's a fine line for me on how much of that do I want to tell you and how much of that do you want to picture on your own. Here's a good example of that. In the TV show MASH, we know that the character Hawkeye was Alan Alda. And so Hawkeye looked like Alan Alda. And the longer the series went on, the older that Alan Alda looked. If you read the first book, done the original MASH book done in the 60s, Hawkeye looks nothing like Alan Alda. In fact, Hawkeye doesn't look like any of the characters of the show, maybe with the exception of Loretta Swit, because Hawkeye in the book is blonde. Reasonably shaped blonde person. And there's all sorts of throwbacks to Crabapple Cove or Cabot Cove. think Cabot Cove was Murder She Wrote. So Crabapple, whatever the town was in Maine that the show was, the book was set in. There's plenty of talk about that in the book, except for a couple of scenes in the TV show. Hawkeye could be from wherever, Kansas, or Wichita, Florida, or whatever. I mean, it's not really the focus of that. Again, it doesn't lose anything unless you read the book. So as an author, as a writer, I want you to fill in as much of I'll give you the story, but what you're picturing as you're reading the story, I want it to be individual to what you think. Obviously, if you're driving through the snow, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the snowstorm. I'm not devoid of details by any stretch of the imagination, but on the other hand, I don't want to be spending a paragraph to describe a snowstorm, for instance, unless it needs it, unless it's part of the story, not as an aside. I mean, if you're in a pizza place and you're waiting for your pizza to come, I really don't need to tell you about the 15 different styles of slices that are on the counter if my character isn't getting them. He may look at, Brian looked at the slices on the counter before he gave his order for the large pepperoni pizza. Okay? That's all I got to tell you. There's slices on the counter. Brian, does it really add anything to the story if I say Brian eyeballed the slices of sausage, meatball, and the works pizza, but he knew in his heart of hearts that it was a pepperoni with extra cheese that he was after? Again, you might say that, yes, that might be the case, but Brian eyeballed the slices on the counter, but he knew in his heart of hearts he wanted the pepperoni with extra cheese. See, I've set some of that up for you, but again, trying to tell you in the head that we're going to be joining, a piece of, pepperoni and extra cheese. Just for a good example. The AI help, and again, if you want to see more about that, let me know. The AI help has been very helpful for me. Because I haven't done this in a while, and a lot of the storytelling that I do is oral, with the stuff presented in front of you in ball game form, and then add things to it while doing the play-by-play and playing the game. You don't really need a lot of expertise in setting up the story. Just practice will get you there, and you know what your audience wants, and you know what style you want to do, and it's deliver what people want you to do. And of course, when you're doing it with a live chat, the chat's going to tell you what they want to talk about. In fictional writing and book writing, you are the puppet master. You control the marionettes. You determine the story. And so if it at least passes the muster of what the AI thinks is passable and tells you what the strengths are, then you're kind of on the right track. Again, the difference where you need to get into with AI isn't going to write the story for you. There are things AI can do that will write stories for you. And if you're writing about, the dime a dip potluck supper at the bingo hall, then by all means use the AI to write that, because you've got other things to worry about if that's what you're doing. But if you're writing a fictional story or a personal story that you might have done the research on, you should be writing that yourself and not having the AI write that for you. It can help you. It can tell you. The grammar checkers are AI, and again, those aren't foolproof. You still got to go through and do it. But it can correct a lot of things that you might not think about. And certainly having a grammar checker look at my stuff and go, you need to put a comma there. A comma doesn't belong there. If I split one more infinitive, I think we might start a war, because you're not supposed to be splitting atoms. But, those things are helpful. Makes you a better writer. Writing makes you a better writer, and having someone check the grammar for that is there. But the AI isn't there to write the story for you. The story is yours, and it's mine, and it's whoever the author is. And so you obviously know more about what you want to do. How you tell it it is up to you. And if you think the AI is full of baloney, then the AI is full of baloney. But do pay attention. Don't let the AI write the story for you. The story is yours. Do use it as a guide so you can be stronger in telling your story. Now, the one nitpicky thing is that the AI critique in Pro Writing Aid only works for the first 4,000 words of whatever you submit. And if you're writing a long fictional piece, short story, novella, novel, it won't take care of it all. And so it's you that strength thing. And so it'll say, you might have missed something here or there. You might want to do a flashback to that. Well, that might have been 2 or 3 chapters ago that you wrote about that in great detail. And the AI, because it's only looking at the 2,000 or so words that you submitted, doesn't know what you wrote 3 weeks ago. It can't, because it can only read the first 4,000 words. So my plea would be to Pro Writing Aid is take the cap off of that. I would love to, take the first, like I said, I think I'm 18,500 words into the story, and run it through that all at once and go, here's where your strengths are, here's where it needs work, here's stuff that we're not quite understanding, and go from there. I'm pretty happy with the AI in Living Writer as long as I'm controlling what I'm asking it. What are the strengths of the chapter, and it'll tell you. And what are some of the weaknesses of what I've just asked you to read. And it's pretty good at telling me that. And again, it's just because you're not necessarily in agreement with because you've just finished what you're writing, what the AI says, look at that again. But it works. And it works for me. And so that's my process of writing a chapter. Writing it, then grammar editing it, and having a couple sets of AI. I don't know if Living Writer and Pro Writing It are using the same AI engine. I don't know if it's Chat GPT or what it's looking at. But take that advice seriously, and if it tells you there's serious problems with it, flag it. And a couple days later, read it again and see what you think. Always good to do that. One of the things I've learned from being a nonfiction writer is that, the pacing thing, the computer says I have down to a T. But learning, especially if you are a writer of otherly worlds and science fiction and fantasy and all that, is world building is important. But world building needs to happen as you move the story along. And the other thing that I would say is that I'm telling my story from a past perspective, looking back on it, as opposed to we're going through it together, but it happened already. So you can write things in the past tense, but not be passive about what you write. So if the grammar editor says your story is too passive, look at how those verbs are. You can write in the past. The word was and could be are okay. But if you are constantly being told to rewrite this because the verbs could be stronger or the sentence is too weak or whatever, take that into heart, because those suggestions are pretty good. Always keep the story moving. Think of your backstory or whatever it is as a bag of cookies or pet treats. The dog or cat always wants the treats. Break them up and toss them along, and so the pet will enjoy them. They know that there's more, but let's say you got like 3 dog milk bones. Break them in half. Break them into morsels. Move the story along, because if you're sitting there and trying to tell me just for grins and giggles that the castle was 23 stories tall and the moat was 3 acres around, and the alligators hadn't eaten in 3 weeks, that really doesn't tell you too much if you're Lancelot is still on the horse a couple miles away. Get that all. There are better ways to do that. So, world building and storytelling, backstory and world building is extremely important. I don't want to say that it's not, but it should always be done in the process of moving the story forward. All right. Questions, comments, concerns, let me know. And we'll do this again. It won't be a month. I really do enjoy doing this. All right. Thank you very much. We'll talk to you the next time. Bye-bye.